She watched him across the dinner table, this man who remembered every anniversary, who texted her good morning without fail, who had already mentally planned their wedding though they'd only been together 8 months. His eyes searched her face for approval after every sentence. His laugh came a half second after hers, never before. When the waiter asked if they wanted dessert, he looked at her first, waiting for permission to have an opinion, and somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she couldn't name and felt ashamed to acknowledge, something was dying. It wasn't that he was unkind. God, he was the opposite of unkind. He was gentle and attentive and available. He was everything she had said she wanted after her last relationship with a man who barely texted back, who ran hot and cold, who left her guessing where she stood. She had prayed for a man like this. She had journaled about him. She had told her friends that all she needed was someone who would just show up. And now here, he was, showing up every single time. So why did she feel nothing? She excused herself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at her reflection. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered. "He's perfect. He's actually perfect." But even as she said it, she knew the word didn't fit. Perfect wasn't the problem. The problem was something she couldn't admit out loud because it would make her sound ungrateful, shallow, maybe even cruel. The problem was that she didn't respect him. Welcome to brutal relationship, where we strip away the comfortable lies and face what's actually happening between men and women. No sugarcoating, no recycling the same tired advice, just the truth that most people dance around. Here's what nobody tells young men, what society has systematically hidden from them in the name of being good. There's a type of man that women will never truly love, and it's not the type you think. It's not the deadbeat, it's not the player, it's not even the emotionally unavailable one, because at least those men generate feeling even if it's painful. No. The type of man women can never fully love is the man who has erased himself in pursuit of her approval. Let that settle for a moment. This isn't about being a jerk. It's not permission to be cold or withholding or manipulative. Those strategies might generate short-term attraction, but they build nothing lasting. What we're talking about is something far more subtle, far more tragic, and far more common than anyone wants to admit. There's another woman whose experience reveals something deeper about this truth. Her name doesn't matter, but her story will sound familiar to millions. She met him online, and their first few dates were electric. He was funny, confident, direct. He challenged her opinions, teased her gently, and seemed genuinely interested in his own life outside of her. He had hobbies, friends, ambitions. When she texted him, sometimes he took hours to respond because he was actually doing something, not playing games, just living. She was captivated. 6 months in, something shifted. He started moulding himself to her preferences. The music he listened to slowly became her music. His weekend plans began revolving entirely around her schedule. When she expressed even mild displeasure about something, he would immediately capitulate, apologize, adjust. He stopped disagreeing with her. He stopped having edges. She told herself this was maturity. This was a man who knew how to be in a relationship. This was growth. But her body knew something her mind refused to accept. She stopped reaching for him at night. Their conversations became functional rather than electric. When he suggested they move in together, her stomach dropped, and not in the good way. What happened? He had committed what might be the most common romantic suicide among well-intentioned men. He had stopped being someone and started being hers. Feel the weight of that. There's a psychological phenomenon that explains part of this, though it goes by many names in the research literature. When we perceive that someone's entire emotional world depends on us, when we sense that their identity has become an extension of our validation, something in us recoils, not out of cruelty, out of overwhelm, out of loss of polarity, out of the sudden, suffocating awareness that we now carry the full weight of their self-worth on our shoulders. Women are often accused of being irrational when they lose attraction to men who worship them, but it's not irrational at all. It's deeply, evolutionarily logical. A man who abandons his own direction, his own standards, his own life in favour of her approval is a man who has signalled something dangerous, that he needs her more than he wants her, and need, past a certain threshold, kills desire. But she's not alone in this. Consider the woman who divorced the nice guy after 15 years. Everyone in her life was shocked. Her friends called her ungrateful. Her mother stopped speaking to her for 6 months. She had 2 children with this man who never raised his voice, who did every chore she asked, who agreed with every decision she made about the kids, the house, the finances, their social calendar. From the outside, she had it made. From the inside, she was suffocating. In therapy, years later, she finally found the words. I never knew what he actually thought about anything. Every opinion he had was just an echo of mine. I started testing him without realizing it. I would say something I knew was wrong, something I didn't even believe, just to see if he would push back. He never did. He just nodded and agreed. And every time he agreed, I lost something I couldn't name. What she lost was respect. And here's the brutal truth that will make some men angry. Respect and attraction are bound together for women in ways that society pretends don't exist. We tell men that if they just treat women well, if they're just accommodating enough, patient enough, sacrificing enough, love will follow. We tell them that female attraction works like a reward system, that enough good behaviour will unlock affection. It doesn't work that way. Love requires polarity. It requires friction. It requires 2 complete people choosing each other, not one complete person and one empty vessel waiting to be filled with purpose. Just pause on that. There's a question worth asking here, one that cuts to the bone of this whole issue. Why do so many men fall into this trap? Why do they surrender themselves so completely, believing this is what love demands? The answer reaches back into childhood for many of them. Boys who grew up with emotionally volatile mothers learned early that their safety depended on reading her moods, anticipating her needs, becoming whatever she required in that moment. They became experts at disappearing themselves to maintain peace, and decades later, they bring this same survival strategy into their romantic relationships, never realizing that what kept them safe as children is destroying them as men. Others absorb the cultural message that masculinity itself is toxic, that having strong opinions or holding firm boundaries makes them oppressive. So they overcorrected. They softened every edge. They agreed with everything. They turned themselves into background characters in their own lives, believing this made them good men. It didn't make them good men. It made them ghosts. This brings us to perhaps the most painful truth of all, illustrated by a woman who recently shared a confession she said she couldn't tell anyone else. She was engaged to a man everyone called her twin flame. They had the same values, the same goals, the same vision for the future. He supported every dream she had. He celebrated every accomplishment. When she wanted to quit her job and start a business, he didn't hesitate. When she wanted to move across the country, he packed his bags without complaint. Whatever. She wanted. He wanted. And she was terrified of marrying him. I feel like I'm dating myself, she wrote. There's no one to bump up against, no edge, no mystery. I know exactly what he'll say before he says it, because it's whatever I want to hear. I used to think that was love. Now I think it might be something else entirely. She was right. It was something else. It was erasure wearing the costume of devotion. Here's what nobody teaches men. Women don't fall in love with your accommodation. They fall in love with your substance, your actual opinions, your genuine preferences, your willingness to hold boundaries even when it disappoints them, your capacity to say no, not out of manipulation but out of authentic self-preservation. There's evolutionary wisdom here that modern culture has tried to suppress. For hundreds of thousands of years, women needed to assess whether a man could hold his position, whether he had enough internal solidity to be a reliable partner in a dangerous world. A man who crumbled at the first sign of her displeasure was a man who would crumble when real threats arrived. His excessive accommodation wasn't reassuring, it was alarming. Modern life has changed many things, but it hasn't rewired the deep circuits that govern attraction. A woman's nervous system still responds to a man's centeredness, his groundedness, his willingness to be his own person even within partnership. These aren't luxuries, they're requirements. And this brings us to the hardest part of this conversation. The men who do this, who erase themselves in relationships, almost always do it out of genuine love. They're not calculating. They're not weak in any traditional sense. Many of them are successful, accomplished, capable in every other arena of their lives. But somewhere along the way, they absorbed a false message. That love means putting her needs above everything, including your own identity. They believed that self-sacrifice was the highest expression of devotion. And so they sacrificed the very thing that made them attractive in the first place. There was a woman I knew years ago who described it perfectly. She said falling in love with her husband was like being drawn to a bonfire, bright and warm and alive. But over the years he gave away all his fuel to her, bit by bit, until the fire was just embers. I kept waiting for him to feed his own flame, she told me, but he just kept giving it all to me. And now I'm standing in front of ashes, feeling guilty for wanting warmth. Read that again. Another woman described her experience differently, but arrived at the same conclusion. She said her boyfriend treated her like she was the entire ocean, and he was just a single wave, defined only by his movement toward her. I wanted him to be his own body of water, she said. I wanted to meet him somewhere, not have him crash into me constantly and then disappear. So what's the path forward? Because identifying the problem without offering solutions is just intellectual entertainment. First, understand that boundaries are not barriers to love. They're its foundation. Every time you agree to something you don't want, every time you abandon your own preference to avoid conflict, every time you swallow your opinion to maintain peace, you're making a withdrawal from the account of respect. Do this enough, and you'll find the account empty when you need it most. Second, cultivate a life that exists independent of her approval. This doesn't mean being distant or unavailable. It means having genuine sources of meaning and purpose that would continue, even if she disappeared tomorrow. Men who have this quality don't need to manufacture it or fake it. They just need to stop abandoning it when a relationship begins. Third, practice disagreement. Not conflict for its own sake, but honest expression of different perspectives. If she says something you don't agree with, say so. Kindly, respectfully, but clearly. If she makes a decision you think is wrong, voice your concern. Not to control her, but to show up as a full human being rather than a validation machine. Fourth, stop trying to earn love through perfect behavior. Love isn't a transaction where enough deposits guarantee a return. It's an organic response to who you actually are. The more you perform rather than exist, the more you manipulate rather than relate, the further you get from genuine connection. Fifth, and this might be the most important, let her be disappointed sometimes, not through cruelty or negligence, but through the natural consequence of you being a real person with limitations, preferences, and boundaries. Her disappointment is not an emergency. Her displeasure is not a crisis requiring immediate capitulation. Sometimes the healthiest response to "I wish you would do this" is "I understand, and I'm not going to." Sixth, reconnect with your own desires outside of her. What did you love doing before you met her? What friends have you neglected? What goals have you put on hold? What parts of yourself have you dimmed to make her more comfortable? Resurrection of those pieces isn't selfish, it's necessary. There's a particular kind of alchemy that happens when a man can hold his position lovingly, when he can say no without withdrawing warmth, when he can disagree without becoming cold, when his affection remains constant even as his accommodation varies. Women feel safe with this man in a way they can't feel safe with the one who will say yes to anything. Because the man who will say yes to anything has revealed that his yes means nothing. I want to end with one final story. A woman who almost left her marriage, then didn't, and what changed. She had spent 3 years slowly losing attraction to her husband. Same pattern we've been discussing. He deferred, accommodated, agreed, and gradually disappeared into the role of supportive backdrop to her life. She had started fantasizing about other men, not because they were more handsome or successful, but because they seemed like they existed as independent entities. One night she told him she wasn't happy, expected him to apologize, ask what he could do differently, promise to be better. The script he'd been following for years. Instead, he looked at her quietly for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "I've spent years trying to make you happy by being whatever you wanted, and I think that's been unfair to both of us. I'm not going to do that anymore. I love you, but I'm going to start being honest, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't like it. Because I think the man you actually want is the one who has the guts to show up as himself." She told me later that in that moment, something that had been dead for years flickered back to life. Not because he said the magic words, but because for the first time in years, she felt like she was talking to someone real, someone with edges, someone who wasn't afraid to exist. They're still together. And she loves him now in a way she hadn't for years. Not because he became harsh or unavailable, but because he became himself. The transformation wasn't instant. There were arguments. There were moments when she pushed back against his newfound honesty, testing whether he would crumble back into his old patterns. He didn't. And each time he held his ground with kindness but firmness, her respect grew. Her attraction returned. The marriage that had been quietly dying began to breathe again. The man women will never love isn't the flawed one, the complicated one, or even the difficult one. It's the one who isn't there at all, the one who gave himself away piece by piece in the tragic belief that emptiness was the price of love. It was never the price. It was always the obstacle. And the moment you understand this, truly understand it in your bones and not just your mind, everything changes. Not because you've become someone different, but because you finally allow yourself to be who you already are. That's what she's been waiting for all along.